Seth S. Williams and Marie Lee Williams. They were married in Fauquier County, and then they probably had 2 children in Fauquier County. That would have been Howard Williams and Maggie Williams. And Maggie died in 1927. And then they had 6, then there was a baby that died maybe like 3 months later when they moved to Maryfield, you know. But I heard that when they first came down to there, they lived in Dunloring somewhere. My mother said she didn't know where. So so they had the 2 children from Fauquier, then the first baby died down in Williamstown. And then after that they had, they must have had 5 more. That would have been, Lucille, Jesse, Esther, Mildred, and Ellsworth. I think I got them all. Yeah, I think I need them all. Yeah. Right.
And so they came down here, and
now, but the last children I named all were born right there in Maryfield.
okay.
Yeah, I think it was 5, 7, 8. Yeah, right now. Yeah, right. So 7, 5, 6. Yeah, 6 were born in Maryfield. Right. Yeah. The first one died there in Maryfield.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talk about how your grandparents got the property.
Well, they bought it, I think, from the Dunns, probably like 1904. That's what I think I was told, or I heard a rumor like that, 1904. So they bought it to make it as a farm, and so they were farming. You know, you farm, you grow things, and you're very good at it. They were raising farm products to sell at the market on about 20-something in K. I'm not sure, and that's what they were doing. So they would work that farm and work it, and then go to the weekends, take the produce to DC and sell it, you know. And but that's what they were doing.
So how many acres did they buy?
It was 40 acres totally. Right.
So how did why did he start to create Williamstown?
Well, as he got older, and well, I think people wanted, when people had to move out of Arlington down at that place where the Pentagon is, people had, he had gotten older, and then people would decide they wanted to buy some land, because a lot of people had to move out of Arlington, so he sold some land to, first one, so I think was the Whitney family, and then the Howard family. And I remember those 2 families well. And so I guess as he got older, you know, he decided to sell off some to make more money, you know, because since he wasn't doing the farming, you know.
And this was probably around in the 30s?
I would say possibly in the 30s. I would say possibly, probably the late 30s, because I was very young in the 40s, and I remember meeting the Whitneys and the Howards then. And also one of Seth Williams, well, 2 of his sons had property there, you know, that, you know, how your family would give you an acre or something like that, you know. Mm-hmm. So they had, and actually he had 3 his relatives, children had land there, I think that's where it was. Mm-hmm. Then later on, I guess, he would sell some more to get more money and everything, you know.
Because he had 40 acres.
Right, he started at 40 acres. By the way, Luther Jackson originally was 22 acres, you know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that lady, she was from Maryfield also. Her last married name was Faison. Audie, she has a strange name, but we used to call her Audie Faison. She lived in New York City, and she sold the land for the Luther Jackson High School. And then I don't know, there was another park of land back there, someone else owned, I can't remember who it was, I didn't find out until late. The name went in one ear and out the other. The lady, so Luther Jackson bought some more land, I think. The county bought more land for us.
And this was an African-American woman that they bought the land from?
Right, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was, yeah.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
So what was Williamstown like?
Well, you know, they were working people, you know, and everybody, it was families, and, you know, it was just working people, you know, people who worked, and some people had little gardens and things like that, and when they got finished work, they'd come on work the garden, and you always try to have some food. And my mother was a good cook, I tell you. I guess her mother was a good cook also. And so, you know, you would raise your gardens, and then you would can food in the wintertime. Canned food for the wintertime. Yeah, my grandfather's first house burned down. There was friction between he and somebody, and somebody set the house on fire and burned it down. So,
A white person or
no,
a black
it was a
person?
black person, yeah.
And they burned his house
Burned
down?
his house down. And they had bought a piano, and they said when he was trying to get the piano out of the house, he got stuck in the door. So it was an old wooden house anyway, so it burned down. And so I think my mother said it was around 1935 when the house burned down. And so I said, well, what did y'all do then? So my grandfather was a carpenter. He learned from some white guy. So anyway, he took the old chicken house and made a house out of it, and he could do that. He could really make a house, I tell you. And so they lived in that, and then they built the brick house. And it was probably one of those pictures that I sent you. Most likely I wanted to do anything connected with him that was in those pictures I sent you. So anyway, he built the brick house, and by the time he worked on it, to do that all by himself. He probably had some help, his sons, but really, it turned out very nice, that him to be able to do that. He was a real go-getter. I guess he figured you say a young man and not doing anything, you need to, you got to work at it. And a lot of the people around that area, they were building their own houses, and he helped to build on some of the houses,
So some of the houses that were in Williamstown,
right,
he helped build,
right, yeah.
along with selling the land.
Right, yes, he did.
Did the people who bought land from him, did they have to go to the bank, or did he sort of set up his own little lending service?
I don't know about that. I know he had to go to, one time that my uncle told me before he died that up on Flat Circle there's a big brick house. He said that's where Papa used to go to do his business with the bank man, because they wouldn't let black people in the bank at that time. Yeah, and there's a brick house that's still up there, and he pointed it out to me. It's beginning to deteriorate now.
So your grandfather, if he had to do banking, couldn't go to the bank, he had to go to, was this a bank president or a bank?
I know he was some man connected with the bank, but later on that changed, he used to do business at the bank, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did your grandparents ever talk about segregation or what things were like?
Well, no, my grandmother used to do, you take in ironing and laundry and stuff like that for people in Pine Ridge. That's what she did. She did that to make extra money. And she worked for people in Pine Ridge maybe as a domestic. I do remember that. I think my mother worked over there too at a time. That's between Route 50 and 236, right.
And how was your grandparents and your parents associated with First Baptist of Maryfield?
My grandmother and grandfather, they went there and they carried their children to church. Back in the day, you want to keep your children straight, and you would, try to keep them in line and make sure they went to church and things like that.
They said something about your grandfather replacing the steeple of the church?
On the church, yeah, that was late. He died in '62, so that had to be in around he died in '62. He wasn't climbing after 60, so it had to be late 58 or 59 when he did that.
And what did he do?
He replaced the steeple on the church because it had rotted out, I think, yeah. And I think he was kind of like the maintenance man around the church there too, I remember he was, in a way of speaking, because I remember I was very young when he built that room. It was called it was where you put your choir robes, in that room on the back of the church. You probably see it in the picture. He put that on. I do remember him building that. Yes, okay. I do, yeah.
When you were growing up, say in the 50s or 60s, do you ever remember any protests or activism or anything going on in the Maryfield or Falls Church area?
In 1955, Ms. Mary Jones, which is my aunt's mother, my grandfather gave her a ride. She said they're gonna build a theater here, and I got a theater open, and they won't let my children or grandchildren go to the theater. That was a drive-in theater in Maryfield. And it had a sign in the window for the longest time, till it almost years and years says no color allowed. So me and my brother would go out and sit on the school ground and watch a movie in there. And then our house was closed, the theater was, you could hear the theater, we could lay in bed and hear that music, or hear the music from the screens. And but I remember that. Now someone in Maryfield organized a group, and they went out there one night protesting about throwing rocks at the theater. I remember hearing that. Yes, they did.
And this was in the 50s?
That was in the 50s, yes it was.
So if you wanted to go to the theater, where did you go?
Well, it was only one theater in Northern Virginia that you could go inside, and that was the city of Alexandria. But the drive-in theater, blacks were allowed to go to the drive-in theater in Manassas. We went there in 1956, our mother took us up there, and we saw a movie up there.
So now, we know that the Jefferson and the State Theater were here in
Right,
Falls
they were
Church.
segregated, yeah.
They were segregated, so you couldn't even go in
No,
at all?
No.
Yeah. What about restaurants around here? Did you go to any restaurants?
My stepfather worked at Harvey's Hickory Hut right at Lee Highway and Gallows Road, and they were typically Southern. You had to go around to the back door or go to the window and get an order and get something to eat. But he worked inside in the kitchen. He was a chef there. He worked there off and on at times, you know.
Now, were you old enough to remember Vincent's store in Maryfield?
I did see that, yeah.
Do you remember going in it?
I did go into it. Vincent's, I don't know whether Vincent, when I went to it when I was young, we went there, it was a guy named Myers owned it. Myers sold the store to a guy named Moss. Moss was married to a Russian woman, and her family had been killed in uprising in Russia, I guess. Communism, I guess, had something to do with it or whatever. So anyway, Moss kept the store for, I guess he must have kept it until he finally closed. Right, he died, and then Ms. Moss maintained the store. And not because she wanted, it became, I think, a rooming house for men, but no black men could stay there. Then now that wasn't her doing, you know. But anyway, I think it was a rooming house for a while. And then eventually I think it became just, I can't say it came abandoned. Maybe she sold it and someone did something else with it, you know.
So when you would go in Vincent's store, did you feel odd? Did they treat you badly?
They treated very nicely. They were
did?
very nice, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Back then also, Vincent's store, well, all I know was Mr. Myers was, you could call and get some food and someone would deliver food to your house. I think a guy named Roy Alexander delivered food to our house, I remember that. Yeah.
And he's black?
Yeah, right. Yeah. They're kin to all the Alexanders around here.
And some of the Alexanders lived in Williamstown.
Yeah, that was Freddie Alexander's family.
Now, did they originally come from the Pentagon area?
No, the Alexanders were kin to my grandfather down the line through a lady named Mrs. French. Almira French was a midwife. So, okay, she was a midwife when my brother was born. Right, I was born first. My brother was born, so I guess it was Mrs. French was the midwife. Then Mrs. Mary Alexander, I still remember the night, 1949, when my sister was born. And Mrs. Mary Alexander was the midwife.